If I could have your attention, please, we're going to begin. My name is Neil Arner. I'm a teaching fellow for this course. You will recognize me. I'm obviously not Miroslav Volf. Our lead professor is away in China. We can probably forgive him for being absent. He's at a Beijing Forum academic conference devoted to world peace, so it seems like a relatively legitimate excuse to be absent. However, I am pleased to be joined today by John Grimm, joint professor from the Divinity and Forestry Schools, who will be speaking after me today. Our schedule for today will be just like most of our prior classes. However, we have a little multimedia going on as well. So I will provide some introductory remarks. Professor Grimm will also speak. Then we're going to watch a brief video that Professor Grimm has brought. After the break, we'll resume for our Q&A in our normal fashion. My introductory remarks will aim to help you learn two things. First, I hope to help you to see some of the interconnections between today's focus on ecological sustainability and various other of our course themes. Second, I want to provide you some categories with which to think about the ways that faiths can promote ecological sustainability. Before commencing, I will offer a working definition of ecological sustainability. I understand ecological sustainability to be a lifestyle that allows future generations the same quality of life and access to natural resources that we currently enjoy. Again, I take ecological sustainability to be a lifestyle that allows future generations the same quality of life and access to natural resources that we currently enjoy. Gus Speth, the former dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, describes an ecologically sustainable lifestyle as, quote, living off nature's income rather than consuming nature's capital. I will now begin by surveying how today's theme relates to 4 of our prior course topics and 2 upcoming topics. First of all, globalization and ecology. On the one hand, current ecological crises are heightening people's subjective sense of being globally interconnected. For example, in the late 1980s, a global alarm was raised about the depletion of atmospheric ozone. Representatives of numerous nations worked together quickly to coordinate an international effort to limit the release of chlorofluorocarbons that were destroying the ozone layer. On the other hand, the influence between ecology and globalization also runs in the opposite direction. An awareness of belonging to one world has inspired some people to pursue ecological sustainability. This photograph, taken by astronauts in the Apollo 8 lunar orbiting mission, is widely credited with helping inspire the environmental movement in the early 1970s. This image was used in the first Earth Day events because it visually suggests that humans are shipmates aboard this precious vessel of Earth that is sailing through an otherwise harsh and lifeless universe. So in some respects, concerns about ecology are promoting a greater subjective sense of being a global community, and in other respects, our awareness of being a global community has motivated concern for our environmental impact. Secondly, corporations and ecology. The burgeoning of corporations over the last 150 years is largely responsible for increasing the scale and pace at which humans have been able to alter the natural environment. Oh, no, the music's back. That's great. Unexpectedly. We do that, okay. Yeah, it wouldn't work when I needed it before class. Corporations have enabled current levels of pollution, deforestation, overfishing, and resource depletion in general. Yet advocates of ecological modernization theory claim that the vast influence of corporations might also be leveraged to promote ecological sustainability. Corporations can, for example, develop and then transport around the globe green technology that could enable developing countries to grow sustainably. Furthermore, some corporations are also adopting what they call a triple bottom line, which is concerned not just with profits, but also with respecting people and the planet. Nextly, gender and ecology. Ecofeminists contend that the same patriarchal attitude of dominance that has historically harmed women and racial and ethnic minorities is now harming nature as well. Such advocates suggest that gender theory can provide useful insights for fostering ecological sustainability. Ecofeminists emphasize the interdependency between humans and nature rather than placing humans in a hierarchical relation to the natural world. Again, poverty and ecology. Environmental degradation disproportionately harms those who are materially poor. Those in poverty tend to be particularly vulnerable to floods, droughts, food shortages, and public health crises. Thus, as Karen Baker Fletcher argues in one of our assigned readings, those who care about the poor have a particular reason for attempting to mitigate environmental crises. On the other hand, many developing nations contend that their best hope for alleviating poverty on a large scale is undertaking ecologically destructive forms of industrialization. In this situation, human poverty and ecological integrity seem rather to be directly at odds. Now, I will also touch on two of our upcoming themes that we have not yet studied: human rights and ecology. A key issue in the discussions of ecological sustainability is whether future humans have rights that can impinge upon our own present behavior. If, for example, such future persons possess a right to live in a natural environment no worse off than the present world, then we are now under a serious moral obligation to live sustainably. The second rights issue with relevance for the natural world is whether non-human animals have rights as well. The reading assignments for this week by Kent Greenewalt, as well as Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, address these issues both about obligations to future humans and to the non-human animal world. And lastly, international relations and ecology. Ecologically unsustainable practices are leading to a depletion of natural resources within specific nations. As states become increasingly desperate to obtain such resources, it is practically inevitable that the future will hold more conflicts like the highly anticipated water wars in the Middle East, in Northern Africa, or in Southern Asia. On the other hand, nations across the world are coming to recognize that addressing global environmental crises requires coordinated action by all states. The urgency of these ecological concerns is thus driving nations into partnerships of necessity. This concludes my sketch of how ecological issues impact and are impacted by other themes from our course. My aim in surveying these lines of influence is to highlight the complex relations between the various topics that we are studying. In a prior version of this course, students were particularly animated by one of the phrases that Professor Wolf used in an earlier lecture. He said, "All monocausal explanations are suspect." The students found that kind of piece of academese amusing, and they had it printed up on T-shirts, and they put it on a coffee mug that they gave to him. They enjoyed reciting that phrase throughout the course. I want to suggest a similar kind of phrase that's relevant to our situation here. I want to say that all monofocal analyses are suspect. And by that I mean any attempt to understand or to evaluate just one aspect of faith and globalization in isolation from these other aspects will be seriously inadequate. The themes that we study in this course mutually inform and influence one another, and an adequate situation of evaluation requires us to have some facility in discussing all of them. Because our course tends to treat them singly, I wanted to pause here just to show you their model their interrelationships. Now, in the second half of my remarks, I will illustrate some of the resources that faiths provide for helping people to think about, to care about, and to stick with ecological sustainability. I will name 3 challenges that impede people from acting for ecological sustainability, and I will suggest one religious resource that addresses each of those challenges. Before laying out these elements, however, I wish to offer 2 caveats. First, though I will focus on the positive influences that faiths may have in causing people to care for the environment, I certainly acknowledge that faiths can also promote ecologically destructive behavior. As long ago as 1967, Lynn White Jr. famously laid the blame for the modern ecological crisis at the feet of Christians in particular. I am aware of such claims. Second, though I will focus on the way that people of faith can promote ecological sustainability, I acknowledge that those who claim no personal faith can likewise pursue the same goal. You may raise either of these issues during the Q&A, but I have chosen to avoid these matters here merely for the sake of brevity. Now, as to the challenges of ecologically sustainable living. One distinctively intellectual barrier to getting people to understand ecological sustainability is the human difficulty of thinking about matters on such large physical and temporal scales. Some cognitive psychologists argue that it is rather unnatural for humans to think on such scales because our brains are attuned to local and short-term planning that would have been sufficient for hunter-gatherers existed on the African savanna. Gus Speth, who I quoted earlier, holds that humans have a very difficult time comprehending ecological issues in which the impact of people's actions is far removed from the space in which the agent is acting. So although in earlier times it might have been obvious not to pollute where we were living, people could follow the impacts there. With things like persistent organic pollutants that get into the environment and travel far distances, we have a rather hard time wrestling with the reality of this circumstance. I contend that faith can help people develop an imagination with which to think on these large and physical time scales. Such an imagination is promoted by teaching people to orient themselves within a cosmology. Tucker and Grimm describe in a reading for today that a cosmology provides an account of humanity's place within the universe and a story about the origin and the end of history. People of faith tend to situate themselves within the long lineage of time and the vast reaches of space. With this imaginative capacity to think big, people of faith can attend to ecological issues, exercising a mental aptitude for contemplating massive and long-term concerns. Vasudha Narayanan illustrates in one of our reading assignments the religious potential for ecological thinking. She shows how the Hindu tradition narratively links a lack of dharma or righteousness with the destruction of the earth. A second challenge to ecologically sustainable living is motivational in nature. How can we get people to care about ecological sustainability when appeals to self-interest have a limited power in reforming behavior? We can probably convince people to replace their incandescent light bulbs with compact fluorescents on the grounds that this switch would save them money in the long term. But in circumstances where promoting ecological sustainability would result in long-term financial loss, what reason is there for a person to do the green thing? Threats of eventual ecological collapse often seem too unlikely or too far away to compel people to alter their behavior. Now, faiths can provide a motivational resource for promoting ecological sustainability. Faiths tend to claim moral authority for their teachings about how one should live. In other words, faiths supply people with an ultimate reason for acting that trumps all other values, including the value of self-interest. The moral reasoning of a theist may fit on a bumper sticker. God says it, I believe it, that settles it. Or as Narayanan asks rhetorically on behalf of the Hindu tradition, quote, if the entire universe is divine, how can we bring ourselves to pollute it? These simple and straightforward logics provide billions of people around the world with non-negotiable duties that they feel compelled to uphold. Thus, if people of faith are convinced that it is morally required of them to live in an ecologically sustainable manner, those people have overriding motivations to do so, even at great personal expense. People of faith are thus well suited for helping to broaden the conversation about ecological sustainability into the realm of morality. Scholars are increasingly calling for ethical treatments of ecological problems as a supplement to standard scientific and economic analyses. For example, Mary Evelyn Tucker states here, leaders from both science and policy fields are realizing that a broader sense of vision and values is missing. While science and policy approaches are of course necessary, they are not sufficient to address transforming human consciousness and behavior for a sustainable future. Values and ethics, religion and spirituality are important factors in this transformation. Finally, even for those who understand and who care about ecological sustainability, there remains a difficulty in persevering in this effort. It is easy for those who pursue a sustainable lifestyle to become overwhelmed by the magnitude, the consequences, and the apparent intractability of the world's ecological problems. when you add in the intransigence of those who close their eyes and shut their ears to the troubles, it is unsurprising that many people experience what has been called green fatigue or eco-exhaustion. For many people, environmental activism eventually leaves them feeling environmental. Thus, Michael Pollan, an advocate of ecological sustainability, says, quote, "Environmental despair is easy. Environmental hope is much harder to nurture." I contend that faiths can supply this rare quality of hope that would help encourage people to continue their personal efforts at promoting ecological sustainability. Faiths ground such hope in assurances that no good deed is without worth, or that the good will eventually triumph over evil in the long run of history. Environmental philosopher Roger Gottlieb has stated that ecological desperation can be overcome by a religious faith that bestows on each ethical act a cosmic value independent of practical results. It was religiously grounded hope that propelled people of faith to oppose slavery in America and to oppose British rule in India. While the odds were clearly against such people, these activists persevered in the hope of victory. The ecological challenges facing humanity today are likewise great, but faiths can certainly serve as one source of persevering hope in seeking an ecologically sustainable future. In summary, then, I have claimed that faiths can powerfully engage the head, the heart, and the hands of those who are seeking to promote ecological sustainability. Faiths can serve as a source of imagination, of motivation, and of perseverance in addressing environmental issues. Faiths can supply a cosmology that helps people to cope with ecological issues on a mind-boggling scale. Faiths can exert moral authority that motivates self-sacrifice on behalf of the natural world. And lastly, faiths can encourage ecological resolve through a promise of hope for a better future. I wish to emphasize just one final observation before I close, and this is a point that Professor Wolf was particularly enthusiastic for me to share. We got it.
You saw it.
Yeah, sorry. It's coming through the... Okay. There we are. Professor Wolf was particularly excited for me to share this final point. It seems to me that these same resources that I've just addressed, these resources that help people of faith to pursue ecological sustainability, are the very same resources that make faiths potentially dangerous and destructive forces in civic affairs. In most of our class discussions, you students have been quick to highlight the problematic consequences of what you've called exclusivist or extremist or fundamentalist faiths. You've suggested that adherents of such faiths are problematic precisely because they show moral certainty, an unwillingness to compromise, and a readiness to sacrifice on behalf of their faith. I wish to point out that these qualities, which seem vices in certain situations, can also be virtues when directed against fighting to protect the natural world. If the ecological crises that we are facing today are even half as severe as some people are warning, then what the world needs most right now is uncompromising moral seriousness and a spirit of self-denial. There may be other sources for these attitudes, but faiths certainly provide one obvious and popular source of them.